Welcome to the Revealed Podcast, where we share stories of how God revealed himself to us in our lives. And I hope that these stories will encourage you in your walk. These stories are all different, and people come from different walks of life. But in every circumstance, they have learned to persevere through their stories. Now, my name is Angie Durham, and I'm your host. I'm really excited because I have Leslie Pyles in the studio with me today. Leslie and I don't really know one another that well, but we met through a former person who was on the podcast, Billy Stevens. And so that's been the fun thing about doing this podcast too, is just getting to meet other people and just having people sent my way from people that I've interviewed before. So welcome today, Leslie. We're here on a Saturday morning recording, and
Thank you for having me.
She was telling me that she got in from work last night at midnight, and I don't know how many cups of coffee it would have taken me to get functioning this morning, Leslie, but you seem like you are alive and awake and ready to talk.
I am. I'll be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to just mention your job because a lot of people don't think about how hard our truck drivers have been working to supply goods to us while we have been going through this crisis.
Right.
I know that you don't drive a truck, but tell me a little bit about what you do at Progressive Freight.
We're a broker, and we broker freight to truck drivers. So we have customers all over the country, and we basically have to find drivers to move product from point A to point B. So our drivers are actually delivering product to the stores where we're shopping from every day.
Well, shout out to you and all the people who have been making the world go round while we've been sheltered in place and in a little bit of chaos. So we appreciate that.
Thank you.
Now, I know that you live in Cairo, so there may be people out there listening that know that we usually do these recordings in Thomasville, but Cairo is a small town that's about, 20 minutes from Thomasville? It usually takes me about 20 minutes to get there. Thank you for driving over today so we could record this.
Absolutely.
And I know you're headed to work after this as
am.
well. Goodness gracious. Your husband is BJ.
Yes.
And how long have y'all been married now?
13 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And y'all have 2 boys.
Yes, ma'am.
Tell me a little bit about your boys.
So DJ is the oldest, and he is our artist. He likes to play video games. He is really, really funny. Very reserved. Brody is, they're like complete opposites. Their birthdays are only 2 weeks apart, but they are definitely complete opposites. Brody is actually younger, but he's bigger, and he's our outdoorsy. He plays football. He likes basically any kind of sports. He can carry on a conversation about a Georgia Bulldog football team, with any adult. So he loves sports. They're both really, really good kids. They do really well in school, both on the, in honors classes. So we're really proud of them for just being awesome kids.
That is good. I told you before we started talking today that I was just going to ask some random questions just because it's good to break the ice and because people like to know random stuff about people. So what does a perfect day look like for you?
A perfect day, well, I would have to say that my favorite day of the week is Sunday. I just love, no matter what happens during the week, Sunday morning is my time where I don't have to worry about work. I don't have to worry about, I can just kind of be in the moment at church, and we love our church, and it's just, the perfect day for me would just be Sunday morning in church with my family, praising the Lord. That's what a perfect day is for me.
Have y'all been able to go back to church?
We started back about a month ago, and I think we had started back a little bit later than some of the other churches, but yeah, it's been about a month for us.
While I'm sitting here looking at you, okay, so here's just another really random question, but the women out there are going to love this. You have really pretty hair.
Thank you.
So what kind of shampoo do you use?
Well, I got this hair. It's a blessing and a curse. My dad has the same hair. It's naturally curly, and if I try to straighten it, if there's any humidity whatsoever, it kinks back up.
Welcome to South Georgia.
Right, exactly. So it's just, I just let it dry naturally, and this is what happens every day.
Wow. Well, if my hair could look like that every day with the humidity, I would let it stay natural too. But you didn't tell me, what kind of shampoo do you use?
What kind of shampoo
There's
do
women
I
that will
use?
want to know this.
I change. I'm always looking for a good shampoo, to tell you the truth. I'll switch up. I will see something on Pinterest or somewhere online, and I'm like, and it's for curls, so I'm like, I gotta try that. And some of them I really like, and some of them are just kind of like, I can't really tell the difference. But I think I'm using Head and Shoulders right now. It does really well.
Well, hey, whatever works, right? Hey, the men are all rolling their eyes right now.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. We're not talking about hunting or fishing or whatever, or football. Sorry. Well, Leslie, let's get into your story a little bit more. So I know that as you and I've just been talking and just preparing for this interview this morning, that you've talked some about what has happened in your life, but nobody out there that's listening, well, I shouldn't say nobody out there that's listening would know, but there's a lot of people who don't know what's happened in your life. So just start telling me.
Well, I grew up with a lot of love. I remember at a very early age, my mom was she was just an awesome mom. She worked hard, and she was a good Christian woman, and that's really the way I want to be with my children. And I remember we've always gone to church. We've always had a church family. At the youngest age, I remember going to Oclocny Church of God, and that was just an awesome group of people. Just such a good church. And I remember my mom's a twin, and so we were really close with my Aunt Marla and my grandmother, and we all went to church together. So it was my cousins, me, my brother, and my sister. We were always in church, and we would go to church on Sunday mornings, Sunday nights, Wednesday nights. No matter what we had going on, we were going to be in church.
When the door was open, y'all were there.
We were there, whether we wanted to go or not, no matter what we had going on. My mom was a single parent, for most of the time growing up, and she always was important for her to have us in church. So just really good memories growing up. Now my dad, he never went to church with us, but I remember him not being kind of in and out of my life when I was at a very early age, and I didn't know back then, what really was happening, why he would be there sometimes, why he wouldn't. And he had some of his own struggle. I know that he struggled with alcoholism, and he did end up getting his life together, and I was at a very early age. My dad's been sober for a long time, but I do remember being young and him having some struggle.
Did he live in the same town as y'all?
He did. Yeah, there were times when he would leave, and to tell you the truth, I'm not really sure where he would go, but we did end up all getting back together as a family, and we've always lived in Cairo.
Do you remember at what age you were when your parents were no longer together, when they were separated?
They've always they've been together, they were married, and then they've gotten divorced, and then they got back together and were together for a pretty long stretch there, and then they ended up getting divorced when I think I was about 15, and that's when we moved out with Mom and lived with Mom.
And how many siblings do you have?
I have an older brother, Jamie, and I have a younger sister, Brandy.
Did you guys, when y'all were growing up, were you close to your siblings?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I was. Now, my brother was 4 years older, so he ended up leaving and going off to college. But me and Brandy and I were 18 months apart, so we had a lot of the same friends, and, we were right there at the same age, so we kind of had shared some of the same interests.
When your dad was around, he was not going to church with y'all. It was just your mom making sure that you kids were going. And
yeah, that was just important. She always had us in church. Dad did not go to church, but he was still, once he had gotten things together, and we were together as a family for that long stretch of time, he was a really, really awesome dad, and he had gotten really involved in AA. Just changed his life around, and really, really a really great dad.
I have a similar circumstance where my dad battled alcoholism, and AA was just wonderful for him.
Definitely, yeah. He put a lot of time into that. Definitely saved his life.
And it was helpful to my mom and to us too, just in knowing how to deal with that situation as a family, because you can foster that behavior.
Definitely.
And that's the definition of codependence, and you don't even realize you're doing it. You would grow up in Cairo, then you would go on and graduate high school.
Yes, I did. Actually, I was still pretty involved in church. I've always sang in church from an early age, for being 3 years old, on the stage singing in church, and I didn't know it at that young of an age, but at about 6 years old, my mom asked me to sing a song for her, and I sang for her, and her jaw just kind of dropped, and I think we knew at that point that's what I needed to be doing. That was kind of my calling, was to be not on, singing in church, but I know that God has bigger plans for me now. I've always sang in church, and I did that till I was probably about 15 years old, and that's when things kind of started changing the worse in my life.
So what happened?
I don't know if it was the situation with my parents, being kind of on again, off again. At the time, I didn't think that it was affecting me, but looking back, I definitely think that it did. Just slowly over time, I started kind of getting away from God and getting away from what I had been raised, and to know what right and wrong is. I just kind of started drifting, and I don't know if it was because I was angry or had resentment, or I don't really know what happened. My mom started going to college. She started going to nursing school, and she was a single parent, so we kind of had to kind of fend for ourselves. She was working a lot and also going to school, and I just got involved with the wrong group of people, and that's when things kind of started changing for the worse.
Did your mom notice that you were getting involved with the wrong crowd?
She definitely did. I think that she was just so stretched so thin, just kind of
just trying to survive.
Exactly.
Going to school, working.
Definitely. And I think that she definitely tried to keep me from going in that direction, but there's only so much you can do with a kid that's, decided they're going to basically do what they want to do.
Yeah, because, we all know that when you try to tell a teenager, you don't need to hang around that person, they're going to hang around them even more.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's almost like you have to use some reverse psychology sometimes and say, oh, wow, I'm so glad you're seeing that person.
Definitely.
But then we have to learn, don't we?
Yes, we do. Thank God for change, and thank God for God's hand in my life. And, God had a plan for me. Even during those years, God had a plan for me. Looking back on it now, I know that God protected me and kept me out of harm's way many, many times. I definitely was not doing what God asked me to do. I'm just thankful for God's mercy and grace.
The beautiful thing is, too, no matter what we've been through, no matter what has happened, God will take that and turn it for good. One of the girls I was talking to the other day talked about the scripture that talks about giving beauty for ashes. Mm-hmm. Sometimes He will allow us to go through those things so that it becomes part of our story, but then it changes something in us for the better.
That is exactly right. The awesome thing about being a Christian is that God's always right there to pick up the pieces. All we have to do is submit to Him, and at any point in time, we can make that decision to come back to God, and He's going to take us with open arms every single time.
How long would you say, starting at age 15, you started hanging around the wrong crowd and then just got into some things that maybe weren't the best for you? And moving forward, when did things start to just snowball?
Eventually, after my parents trying to intervene, and they saw that I wasn't going in the right direction, and at that point they couldn't do anything with me. I mean, there would be times where they wouldn't see me for days at a time. I just wouldn't come home. They would have no idea where I would be. They wouldn't have any contact with me. That was kind of the turning point there. And I think maybe a year later, that's when things really changed. And I spent a year in a group home. It was an all girls group home. Looking back, that's definitely the best thing that ever happened to me, was going to that home, spending a year getting my life back together.
What did they do at that group home that helped you?
There was lots of different girls that were there, young girls, anywhere from the age of 14 to, I was the oldest. I turned 18 while I was there. But some of those girls were, I think, as young as 13 and then on up to 18 years old. There were group sessions, there were team building activities that we did, just kind of learning to trust people again. It just gave us, coping skills, and it just kind of sat me down for a year to get my life back on track.
That's a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Was it hard for you to be away from your family during that time?
It was, and then I remember being there and just being, wanting to go home so bad. I definitely was where I needed to be, at that time. I definitely needed to get away from that group of people. I needed to get away from those things that I was involved in. It was hard, but I definitely know that going to that place changed my life forever.
Was that something you were made to go to through the courts, or was that a choice that your parents found for you that they thought would help?
It wasn't court ordered, but basically at that time my parents kind of threw their hands up. We had a family friend that knew about this place, and they suggested it, and reluctantly I went. Wasn't mandated. Basically my parents said, you're going or you're not going to be in the house.
Did that make you angry at your parents at the time, or could you see the value in them putting that boundary up that they weren't going to accept your behavior?
Well, I definitely see the value in it now, but as a 17-year-old girl, basically wanting to do what I wanted to do, I didn't see the value of it then, but I definitely know that was where I needed to be.
You were 18 when you finished your course of stay at the group home.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened after that?
After that, everything was back on track, and I went home and started going back to church again. At that point, my mom was finished with college, so there was a lot less stress on her, and the family started going back to church again. And then, I don't know, it's something about being in a small town. It's so easy to get back into those old habits, and that's what ended up happening. After a year or so of being on the right track, I started falling back into those old habits again, and drifting further and further from God. And so before I knew it, I was kind of back in that same, or nearly back in that same boat that I was in before I went to that group home.
What kind of advice could you give someone who is trying to turn their life around, but they feel that lure of going back to that old life? Now that you look back on that situation, what kind of safeguards do you think you could have put in place that would have prevented you from turning back to that?
Maybe just being a little more open to listening to what people have to say, and listening to advice of my parents, and then having a support system of somebody else that maybe has gone through something similar. That is probably one of the most important things. And so many times we think that we can run from God, but when God has a plan for a life, God's gonna find a way to get your attention one way or the other. So just having a personal relationship with God, it's just made all the difference in the world. And sometimes as a young kid, you just have to go through those things. The things that affected me, the way that they didn't affect my brothers and sisters like that. So I think sometimes it's just things that kids go through sometimes, and they handle it differently.
I think also when you look at situations where people are struggling, no matter what they're struggling with, being able to, as you said, speak with somebody and just be real with that person. I know sometimes, because I see this in my own children, it's easier for them to be honest and just share what they're struggling with people other than their parents. I see the value of what you're talking about, just having a mentor or somebody who you can just go and kind of just bare your soul with.
Right.
And just say, I'm really struggling with this and I don't want to go back to this, but I do.
Right.
What can I do? And just to be able to just be honest.
Definitely. And it was right around that time where my husband and I met and started dating. He was kind of that person for me. I mean, we really were best friends. He was raised in church, I was raised in church, but our relationship didn't start off with that foundation of God. So we went through some hard times of our own, being together and not putting God as the most important thing in our lives, of that foundation in our lives. We didn't have that in the beginning, and it's taken us going through a lot of things to get to this point.
Did you notice early on in the marriage that you guys were struggling? Did it end up leading to a separation, or were you guys able to work through those things?
We did get married we were both so young, and we just had a lot. We had a lot to learn. We were married for several years before, and we did end up separating. And there were a lot of things that led up until that point. We were both living in the world. We were in this marriage, but we were putting everything else before God. We were, putting money before God, just putting all these things before God. We went through a lot of things, and we did end up separating for 3 years. I think that nobody really expected us to be able to make it work. I definitely think there were some people that weren't very supportive of our marriage, so we spent some time apart for about 3 years.
That's a long time to be apart, Leslie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a long time to be apart. And we both needed some time apart. I don't know. I don't think the plan was to separate and then find our way back to each other, but I think that was God's plan, because that's what happened. And our relationship is totally different now. We have a strong marriage, and there's no anger, resentment, guilt. We just had to completely let go of the past, because there are a lot of things that led up until that point of when we separated. We didn't just decide one day to, hey, this isn't working, we're going to take some time apart. There were some things that happened that basically destroyed our marriage, and we both thought that it was over with.
What happened during that 3-year period for both of you where you started changing? You realized we do want to be together.
I think the main thing while we were separated is how much it hurt our children. I mentioned before, it affects, like, divorce and things like that affects children differently. But for my kids, they were just devastated that we weren't together, and to try to make them understand why we weren't together as a family. There was those 3 years there where my kids were not happy. They wanted their mom and dad back together, and they didn't understand why we couldn't be together as a family. And I started doing some soul searching. He started doing some soul searching. And to tell you the truth, we haven't really talked too much about what happened during that 3-year period. But I know at about the 2-year mark, God started laying it on my heart that we needed to work on our marriage and get back together. At first, I was thinking, no. I know what we've been through. I don't want to go through that again. How can we move past all the hurt, all the things that have happened, all the things that we have done to each other? How are we going to be able to put the pieces back together? I just began to pray. I knew that's what God wanted me to do, and I said, okay, God, I don't know how I can get past the things that have happened. I don't know how He can get past the things that have happened. But if you're telling me that this is what I need to do, then I'm going to start praying about it. So I started praying about it. We talked about it. I had told Him that I felt like God was telling me that we needed to try to make it work, and He said that He had been feeling the same thing, that God had been telling him the same things, and he had been praying about it as well. We started working on building our marriage again.
I love that, because you may not have even have been aware until you talked to your husband that God had been speaking to his heart about that as well. I think that as I've looked at my own marriage and I've talked to other people who've struggled with their marriages, one of the common denominators that I keep hearing is God will speak to you and show you where you need to change your heart, where we want to point that finger at the spouse and say it's all their fault. They've been the problem.
Definitely.
Where we need to be looking at our own hearts. And I think God wants us to do that so that he can start changing our heart, but we've got to let that spouse, let God deal with them, not us. And it's amazing how he can work in two hearts and we don't even know what's going on with the other.
Yeah, that's definitely right. When I started praying for God to do a work in my own heart instead of me looking at him, like you said, and pointing the finger saying, well, you did this, this is the reason why our marriage didn't work. I asked for God to reveal some things and let me work on those things. And the main thing is just not being so selfish. And maybe it was because we were young. I don't really know. But I know that now, when we decided that we were going to try to make it work again, we said this time we're going to put God, number one, in our lives. And we had never really had that conversation before. I had always taken the boys to church. He had never really gone to church with us. But when we had that conversation, he said, we're going to go to church as a family. And the only way this is going to work this time is if we make God the focus of our lives. And so that's what we did. We made a decision not to bring up anything that's happened in the past. We had to forgive each other right then and there and make a promise that we weren't going to bring up those things that have happened. We're just moving on.
I think that is such a good point to make too, because I think that's a mistake that a lot of people make is they want to just hold on to, they'll say, oh yeah, I've laid that down, I've forgotten about it, but then get into an argument, and let's be honest, we're human and we get into arguments with one another as spouses, even if we're working to repair things and things are good in the marriage. It's just a natural part of life, I think, for couples to argue. But then when things start to escalate and that spouse can bring up something from the past that to wound that other person, that's a very negative thing to happen. I think it's just so good that you guys were both just able to say, no, we're not going back there. God has healed that. He's taken it as far as the east is from the west, and there's no need for us to bring that up again.
Definitely. I remember when we were living out there in the world, we were married, and we seemed to have, it was just so many issues, so many problems that we were having, and we would go to couples therapy. We had gone to counseling. I was dealing with some major anxiety, depression issues. I've taken probably every depression medicine that's out there, and anxiety medicine, self-medicating, just for so long. Whenever God began to heal our marriage, he began to work on everything. Those panic attacks that I dealt with for years and the anxiety that I struggled with, that's no longer present in my life. I think that when we decided to let go of all that anger and that resentment, God began to not only heal our marriage, but heal other things. I got healed from those panic attacks. I got healed from the anxiety. Also, my oldest son, DJ, he has a seizure disorder. He has epilepsy, and he's been having seizures since he was 8 months old. He started having them. We didn't know. We were on vacation, the first one he had, and then from that point forward, he would have 4 or 5 seizures a night. That was very stressful for us. It put a lot of stress on our marriage, and it put a lot of strain on our marriage. As a young mother, and just, when I was just angry, and that caused a lot of anxiety and a lot of panic. I dealt with that for so long. When my husband and I decided to get back together and try to make it work again, we began praying over him, over our son, and claiming healing in the name of Jesus, and we had lots of people praying for him. He's been healed of those seizures. It's been 2 years since he's had a seizure. God has just changed. He's just changed so many things.
That just brings tears to my eyes, because that's what God wants to do. He wants to come into our lives and bring healing to those hurt places. Isn't it amazing how negative emotions, which the Bible says there's nothing wrong with being angry, but it's what you do with that anger that can cause the problem. But you can look at that now and see that that was causing anxiety attacks and depression in other areas of your life. And then to think that you two could join together as a couple and pray over your son and get healing for him physically is just what God wants to do.
God is still a God he's still working miracles every day. And I want people to look at my son and know that God still heals, because that's what God's done. He's healed my son. And, 2 years later, he hasn't had a seizure in 2 years. That's what God can do. God can heal your marriage. God can heal your past. If you're anything, any resentment, anything you're holding on to, when you submit to God and you really submit to God and you go all in with God, he still is a God of working miracles. God can heal your mind, he can heal your heart, and he still can heal you physically. And that's what God has done for us.
As we were preparing for this interview, you talked to me about one of those pivotal moments in your life. Tell me a little bit more about that.
It's amazing, because I knew at the time that moment right there was going to change my life, and it could have changed my life in a completely different way. We had gone on vacation. We go as a family to Alligator Point a couple of times a year. We've been doing that since I was young. Me and my youngest son, Brody, we were out at the sandbar, and we had been out there for probably 3 hours, just kind of hanging out. My sister was out there. Her husband was out there. Her kids were out there. We noticed that there was a storm coming in, so I told Brody, okay, we need to, make our way back to the shore. The tide had come in, and I didn't realize it, and so when we stepped off that sandbar, we went down. And I'm a very good swimmer, but after about maybe 2 minutes of trying to make our way back to the shore, the current got us and started pulling us and took us about 50 yards down. And before I knew it, Brody and I were separated from everybody. And I was trying to kind of go with the current. You're told just kind of go with the current.
Yeah.
But when you're in, it's totally different when you're in the moment. I don't know. I had this moment of, okay, this is it. We're going to drown. There's nobody around to save us. I was out of breath. I couldn't go any further, and I started going under. And Brody started yelling, somebody help my mom. Please, somebody help my mama. And I went under, and out of nowhere, a family friend he came running down the beach, heard the commotion, jumped in the water and snatched me and Brody out of the water and brought us back to the shore. And it was the same with my sister and her husband. Her husband almost didn't make it. My husband had to jump in the water and go save him. And that moment right there was, that was that life and death situation for me, where we were so close, that moment. And I knew, even though we had begun to try to, work on the marriage, and we were, we still, and it just made me think about how quickly things can change, and so it made me realize I want to be ready all the time. You never know what can happen. Riding in your car, getting in an accident, you just never know.
Well, it's amazing how God can take those times in our lives and then just show us a different picture with them too. And it seems to me, as I'm hearing you talk, that you were rescued that day. That was an opportunity for you to go back and really work on this marriage and look to God for the healing to take place in your marriage.
Yeah, that was definitely the day when we really got serious. I mean, about getting on the right track and doing this thing the right way. And I remember talking to my husband that day, and he was just devastated. I mean, we had made it, but he, just the thought of us, losing us that day was the turning point. And we haven't looked back since.
What a beautiful story.
There.
Well, you certainly have an amazing story, Leslie, when you think about all that you've been through growing up and how God had to get your attention. Maybe that started in the group home, and then getting out of that situation and trying to stay on the straight and narrow. And I want to encourage people, because I know so many times people, they try so hard to do what's right and they still end up failing. But just in hearing your story is just a reminder of just how gracious and loving God is. And he's just waiting there for us to just come to him with honesty, just raw honesty, and just say, God, I'm struggling with this. I just can't do it. Just let him take over and start making those positive changes in our hearts that will free us from whatever is hindering us from living a fully abundant life.
Having that humble heart and coming to God and just submitting yourself fully to God. And like you said, being honest with God. I think that's the most important thing, that you don't have to be this, pray really well out loud, or you don't have to, God, it's not about how many words you use, it's about where your heart is. And if you come to God with an honest, humble heart and just say, Lord, I need you to, like you said, I'm struggling with this, help, please help me. Please show me what I need to do. Please give me what I need to do better. And God will definitely do that for you.
I'm really grateful to you today for sharing your story. I love the fact that this was your first time putting this out there. And I know that took a lot of courage for you to do that. And I just want to remind anybody out there who may be hearing this podcast that I would love to pray for you. And you can reach out to me at Angie@revealedpodcast.org. I would love for you to find us on Facebook, and you can find us on Instagram as well at Revealed Story. Our website is revealedpodcast.org. And I have to always give a shout out when I remember to all the people who've made this podcast possible. I couldn't have done this without the help of Austin Reams, William Hamill, and my daughter, Grayson Durham.